Hello and welcome to Opening Doors podcast. I am Rachel Dalinka, and today my guest is Dr. Omar Reda. And Dr. Reda is an author of two books. He is a board-certified psychiatrist and a Harvard-trained trauma educator. Welcome, Dr. Reda.
Thank you, Rachel. Really pleasure to be with you today.
Wonderful. So I was introduced to you and your work through my work with Heal PA, which is a great organization that is bringing trauma education to free to all PA residents and is working towards having schools be school teachers and personnel and government personnel, local government personnel become trauma informed. So I guess the best way to start is, what does that mean to be trauma informed?
Thank you. I mean, I really admire the work done in the state of Pennsylvania. And there is lots of a good and very strong, advocacy for just how to treat people with compassion, and rather than say, what's wrong with you, just sit with people and say, what happened to you? And try to listen to their stories with validation. Many people, they lost their voice because every time they want to share their story, we are not ready to hear it from them, or we dismiss or minimize what happened to them. And I think if this happens to the children, many of our kids, they go to bed crying themselves to sleep. And I think this is a cycle that needs to be broken.
Absolutely. That is a big part of why I'm doing this podcast. Opening Doors is about giving people a chance to tell their stories and to heal from them and grow from them. I think it's almost impossible today to be alive in the world and not go through some type of trauma.
Yeah, my goodness. Yeah. I mean, you cannot really cure trauma. It's not like a disease that you need to take a medication for. It's like a lifestyle. You integrate what happened to you. And exactly like what you said, maybe there is a wisdom and growth and transformation that happen because now, there are resources that you have not discovered about you or about the world around you that you become familiar with after you go through a traumatic experience. Not meaning that I want people to go through trauma. Of course, I wish if I lose my job and because I am a quote unquote trauma expert, I would love for children not to get traumatized. But unfortunately, human violence and trauma is here to stay. So how can we cope through it and just learn from it?
Absolutely. I remember when I first did some trauma training as a yoga teacher. It was a trauma-informed yoga teaching. And the teacher gave a list of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And I'm filling it out, and I'm like, oh my God, I have this one, I have this one, I have this one, I have this one, I have this one. Whoa. The idea of what you mentioned before, what happened to you, as opposed to what's wrong with you. It's a beautiful book by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey that really delves deep into understanding the brain chemistry of trauma and how that affects kids. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ACE score is like a 10-point score. There was a discussion of 10 different traumas that happened to people before the age of 18. Of course, it's not comprehensive or inclusive of other experiences. We know that there are communities that go through, torture, discrimination, racism, forced migration. But the 10 points that started the ACE score, basically it's physical, sexual, and psychological or emotional abuse, physical and emotional or psychological neglect. So these are 5. And then things that happen in the family dynamics. For example, incarceration of a parent, domestic violence between parents, divorce of parents, and maybe mental illness or drug addiction. and a caregiver. So these 10 experiences, and they don't really necessarily mean that you're gonna have a very difficult life if you score, 4 or more. But really, it's I think Dr. Bruce Perry put it very beautifully. We want you to know your number, not to ruminate about the number, but to honor the experience. So just to honor your own experience and know that you are not crazy, or you're not, going through a hopeless situation. But for us to understand, maybe in the future, maybe somebody's interaction with me, we're gonna quote unquote trigger or activate a childhood experience. Maybe somebody is shouting at me. It will remind me of my parents shouting at me, or going through watching domestic violence between them. So I wanted people to be aware of what happened to them as children, and maybe it would be beautiful if they process what happened to them, so they don't inherit their trauma story to their children. I think the best thing you can do is not to pass that ugly legacy to the children. Yes, I know maybe it did not start with you, but it will be very beautiful if it stops with you.
Absolutely. It's shocking to me in my own life and experience how actually difficult it is to break the cycle of generational trauma, and how embedded in us it becomes. And I know with a lot of the people that I've spoken to on the podcast, and the people that are telling their stories, so much of what brings people to act in a certain way is because of what they were exposed to as children. I mean, one of the ideas that I know that you've talked about in Untangled is being able to talk about what happened to you. Can you share a little bit about your story and what brought you to this kind of work, and making this the focus of your work?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes speaking up is almost a luxury or a privilege that some people, they don't feel safe. Maybe when they speak up, they're going to get really more damage, happen to them. So I want to, make sure that people should speak up only when it's safe to do so. At the same time, I think speaking up will open channels of communication. I don't want to blame the parents for what's happening to the children. Every parent is trying their best given their circumstances. Sometimes we just don't have enough tools, or we don't know how to show our children that we love them and care about them. And so I think a little bit of education and teaching is needed here, because many households, they are losing the American dream, chasing it. They provide materialistically for their children, and they make sure children go to bed with full stomach. At the same time, they neglect the emotional needs. So these same children go to bed with broken hearts and restless souls. And this cycle, I think it's very, very important to break it, because no loved one should feel that they have to walk on eggshells around each other. And many of us as caregivers, we come home very exhausted. We depleted our energy outside the house. So we either lash out or shut down in front of our families, and that's really a shame. And that's why I wrote my other book, The Wounded Healer, because I think we also deserve for our wounds to be healed. But I got introduced to the field of trauma at a very, very early age. I was only 6-year-old when my 14-year-old sister, she became blind, and then we unfortunately lost her for brain cancer. So I wanted to become, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to be a brain surgeon, so I can, make sure that doesn't happen to. Just watching my mom and my dad go through that difficult experience really broke my heart. I did very good in medical school. There were unfortunately some unrest in my home country, Libya. So I was forced to leave Libya and go through the asylum seeking and the refugee experience. And that's how
It's a huge trauma in of itself.
Yeah, that's how I got involved in the refugee work.
Mm-hmm. And I know that you've been back to Libya and other countries working with kids that are in refugee camps. It's almost impossible to imagine the level of trauma that families that are living in a refugee camp are going through in every moment. How do you serve that population?
Yeah, I mean, of course, it's not an easy and there is no one size that fits all. Make sure that you respect the culture, that you are humble, have a student attitude, make them teach you about what they're going through, and don't force your own interventions on them. Make sure that you co-craft with them. We don't walk the walk for our folks. We walk with them. So we believe in their resilience and their inner coping and what they can bring from the beauty of their culture and religion and so on. So that's really what my approach has been. It's not always like the gold standards in the field. I know there are like evidence-based approaches that are wonderful, but many times in the refugee community, we go the other way. We do, practice-based evidence rather than evidence-based practice. We start with a practice that makes sense to them. Then we retrieve information and we apply assessment tools, and we make sure that intervention is working. And as I said, I mean, we really rely very heavily on their wisdom because there is lots of wisdom in the survivor of trauma.
Right, absolutely. As far as the wounded caregiver, I'm a daughter of a therapist. My mom was a psychotherapist, and she listened to people's traumas all day, and it's very intense. And I would say to her, "How can you do that? Like, how can you hear these horrible, go through that for hours and hours and hours, and then like let it go? How do you just let it go? How do you not let that just pull you under as a caregiver? And as a parent who's caring in a family where there's drug addiction, where there's incarceration, where there's chronic illness, mental illness, how do the caregivers, what do you recommend to caregivers to be able to take care of themselves?"
Yeah, thank you. And of course, caregivers are not only people in the healthcare industry.
Right.
We know that we care for our families in different capacities. So sometimes we care beyond our family, like when we are faith and community leaders, or when we are a teacher or police officer. Mm-hmm. So everybody on the front lines is a caregiver. And I think it's very important for us first to have the insight and the self-awareness that our needs are very important also, that we have the right to express our needs, so assert our boundaries in respectful ways, making sure that we don't neglect others, but we cannot really be everything for everyone all the time. This is really the definition of insanity. And I think it even takes away from people empowerment if they only rely on me. There are resources beyond who I am, and people should use every single available resource for them within and outside their immediate support system. So I want that to really be the first step for people to be aware, and also to have the self-compassion that my needs are very important. Even machines deserve breaks, so how can I imagine that I'm going to continue to pour from an empty cup? So I need to make sure that I fill my own emotional tank so I can give to others. So self-awareness is very important, asserting our boundaries, knowing how to fulfill our needs. And I think very important, Rachel, is also to be open to feedback. Many times we are completely burning out and we don't realize it because there are people who need me. So how dare I take care of myself? So when my loved one, or maybe my coworker, or if I build a community of care around me that gives me feedback, and I will be hopefully, willing to listen to them, because when they need me, I'm going to provide feedback that I hope that they will listen to.
Right. So when your community says, "I notice that you're kind of on the edge," that you listen to that and you say, "Oh, wait, yeah, maybe you're right."
Yeah, and I think it also comes from experience, I would say, during my 4 years of residency as a psychiatry young, man in the state of Tennessee. I graduated from Memphis, and I think it was very difficult for me and my wife because I did not know my boundaries. I didn't know I was going through burnout. It was very difficult adjustment for our marriage. But then I got very honored to be accepted into the Harvard program in refugee trauma. So I learned the necessary tools and skills that how can I cope and how can I take care of myself and my immediate family, because I can be the hero going to refugee camps, taking care of all of these children and neglecting my wife and my own children doesn't really make any sense.
That's intense, and that's a lot of real honest self-reflection. Another thing that I appreciate also from your books is your, after all of it, all that you've went through in Libya and all that you have been through in helping people that are dealing with refugee situations, your belief in that there is beauty in humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the four foundations for healing, the first one is safety. Usually people don't feel, that they can meaningfully heal if they are not safe. And then the second thing is a human connection. Then hopefully a pursuit of justice, just making meaning of what happened to me. And finally, the focus on beauty. And I mean, Dr. Mulika, who was my supervisor in Harvard, he said, Omar, if you are not looking for a beauty in every single interaction with every single one of your clients, then you are not practicing medicine. And I really appreciated that about that approach. And so every time I sit with a patient of mine in the psychiatric inpatient unit, somebody who's going through active withdrawal from substance or acutely psychotic or hurting themselves, I just try to remind them there is lots of beauty and light inside of them. And sometimes they don't feel that light because things are very dark outside. But I believe beauty and healing come from within.
Can you give the listeners self-care practices that might be helpful for caregivers and people suffering acutely?
Mm-hmm. I would say meaning making is a big deal when it comes to trauma. Many times we assign a meaning to what happens to us. So there are like people who define trauma in different ways. That definition I really liked from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA. They define trauma as three things. All of them start with the letter E. So the first thing is the event, what happened to you. The second thing is the experience, the meaning that you assign to what happened to you. And the third thing is the effects. So the impact of what happened to you on you and everyone around you. So I think meaning making and trying to just find just what's the wisdom that I can gain of what happened to me, so I can move forward towards closure and eventually healing, and even maybe post-traumatic growth and transformation. So that's why, I use my example of losing my sister. That was the inspiration of me becoming a doctor. And after that, I was almost kidnapped at age 11 for sexual reasons. Unfortunately, I never knew that adults will do that to children before that very eye-opening experience. So that made me very vocal about trying to protect children from sexual violence. When I went through the asylum-seeking experience, I became a refugee involved in mental health of refugees and immigrants. And when some of my colleagues either left the field of medicine and nursing, or unfortunately, two of them died of suicide during the pandemic, this is why I broke my silence and wrote The Wounded Healer. So I think just trying to find meaning and try to maybe do something about it. So when the war in my home country, Libya, happened in 2011, I had lots of PTSD because I lost loved ones. And my mom, she said, Omar, I'm going to meet you in heaven. And, her voice gave me lots of PTSD. And I leaned on four things in order to cure what happened to me. One is my faith. I'm a very big believer in God and the divine wisdom. And then loving my family and celebrating people who, not only who died, but also people who are still in my life, that maybe I can repair some ruptures in these relationships and rebuild bridges. And then also leaning on gratitude. I think we don't really focus on gratitude much. There is many things that we should be grateful for. And finally, acts of service, I think, which can be very interesting. I ask people to engage acts of service in order for them to heal their own burnout, because giving to others just fulfill our soul. Yeah. I know self-care many times is seen as only taking care of your body, but we need also to remember we need to take care of our mind, our heart, and also our soul.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a practice, a yoga practice, kindness. And one of the things that ahimsa is being kind to yourself and being kind to others. And one of the things I think about as I go through my day is just trying to be kind to strangers, smiling at people. When I live in Philadelphia, it's a city. Most of the time people walk by, they don't make eye contact, they don't talk. And I just say hello to everybody. And a lot of times people are like, hi. Sometimes people are so excited and happy that you said hi to them. They're like, hey, how are you? And but it's interesting how insular we become, um, walking down the street amongst people that we're alone in a crowd. And certainly the pandemic only exacerbated uh, isolation more in our society. What do you see as some of the post-pandemic issues?
Yeah, and I see the same, even though Philadelphia is like the city of brotherly love. Many times you don't feel that love because people are very busy. They're very busy on what's called social media and their gadgets and devices
Yeah.
that they lose the human connection. And I would argue human connection can literally save lives. Like there is this guy who went to the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco in order to end his life. And he said, I'm going to give life one more chance. I'm going to just walk back and forth. And if one human looked me in the eye or smiled or say, good morning, why are you on the top of the bridge? I'm not going to do it. And unfortunately, nobody paid attention to him. So he jumped and he survived. And he goes to high schools and remind these children that we need to really reestablish a human connection because it's very, very important. And unfortunately, many children, they got used to that because of the online education. And
Mhm.
I saw how the impact of that on people have shorter fuse. They don't have much compassion for one another. And unfortunately, the political environment in our world, there is lots of hate and othering and pointing fingers and people blaming one another for what's happening in the Middle East and other parts of the world. So I see lots of trauma that's being enacted or either through lashing out or shutting down.
And what you were talking about earlier, finding meaning, it brings me back to the great book by Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, Man's Search for Meaning. And one section he talks about that they made jokes when they were in the camps, and that if he hadn't been able to joke, if he hadn't been able to gather some of the prisoners and say, look, there's a sunset, that absolute loss of humanity, of those aspects of humanity, would have done him in. So it's interesting, again, just how finding meaning can help us get through even the worst experiences.
Yeah, and that's really a fantastic book, and how to really find that source of light in all of the darkness is just something that we need to master because there is lots of ugliness, but I believe there is also lots of beauty, and it's our decision. We need to be deliberate where we look. If you only look in the trash, you're gonna find trash. But if you look all over, you might see lots of flowers and birds and beauty that God created for us, and we just decided not to pay attention to it.
Right, right. And that's another there's another interesting writer, a guy named Napoleon Hill. He's a business writer, but his idea, same thing. What you think about becomes your reality, and you have the power to change your thoughts. You have that power to say, I'm going to focus on the flowers today. I'm going to focus on the fact that I'm here and I still have a chance to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, it's an intentional decision. I believe there is a book by Houston Kraft. It's a very small book, but it's called Deep Kindness. And just he wrote it because like a woman was, sitting next to him on the plane, And she asked him, what do you do? And he said, I'm a writer and I'm very interested in a topic called deep kindness. And she said, well, what does that mean? And he said, most of our interactions are very superficially pleasant. When I say, hey, Rachel, good morning, how's your day? Most likely I'm going to pass by you and I don't even wait for your answer because I'm very busy with my own, caseload and all of the things that my day is bringing. So you might learn that because I don't really deeply care about you, you're going to just give me a superficial answer. And he said, the woman was so crying heavily because of his answer. And he said, what happened? And she said, before she boarded the plane, they told her, your father is dying. You better catch the first flight. And then, unfortunately, before the flight left, her father actually died. And she said she was crying in the airport, and maybe 3,000 people passed by. Not a single one say, hey, ma'am, are you okay? Can I give you a cup of water? Can we talk? Can I give you a tissue? And the deep kindness is something that really, really can change maybe the outcome for many people around us. But because of our own bias and because we believe stories that have been dictated on us, I'm not going to approach you. I am a Muslim Arab man and you're a Jewish, white woman. Why should we connect? But I believe this is exactly why we should connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That what makes us human is much stronger than our differences could ever be. I thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. I'm hoping that those little acts of kindness can make a difference. Some of the stories that people tell me, there's that one person that reached out to them. There's that one person that saw them suffering, and one person can make a difference. And so I'm just hoping that anyone listening to our discussion can remember to try to be that one person in somebody else's life.
Yeah, it takes one person. You're absolutely right. Like I remember, like when there was an unfortunate incident in New Zealand when somebody walked into a mosque and unfortunately 51 people died that day because he opened fire. Like the same day, there is a Jewish neurologist who he reached out. We don't know one another. We just work in the same hospital. And he said, Omar, I know you are Muslim and I just wanted to see if you're okay today. And he told me, is there anything I can do for you? And I told him, you exactly did what I needed that day. But I would love to maybe leave the audience with practical tips very quickly. Yeah, if you remember maybe 3A, 4D, and 5R. I'm going to give an explanation of these three tools. So if things are struggling in your relationship with your loved ones, and do three things that start with the letter A. So the 3A approach is the first thing is pay attention. There are beautiful things that happen under our roof that we don't pay attention to. We take our loved ones for granted. The second thing is, express appreciation to the things that you paid attention to. And appreciation is better expressed in action, not only in lip service. And then just try your best to express as much affection as possible to your loved ones. Maybe eye contact, smile, spending quality time together, and so on. If you are overwhelmed as a caregiver, I ask you to do the 4D approach. If you have many things on your plate, just look at your list of items. Is it something you can do? Then do it immediately. Is it something you can delay? Then delay it for later. Is it something you can delegate to others? Then absolutely delegate it. And then if it's something you can delete from your list, then do that without feeling guilty. And the last one is the 5R approach, which is if you are completely going through burnout, the first thing, recognize you need a break. The second thing, actually request or demand a break. The third R is to rest during your break. Many people, Rachel, they use their break time to catch up on very stressful material and their social media and so on. So just acknowledge that you need a break and actually rest during your break. And then realize your priorities during the break. Why am I a caregiver? And part of being a caregiver is to take care of myself as well and put the oxygen on me first. And the last one, this is how you're going to re-engaged, more refreshed, and re-centered with the people that you care for.
Nice. Thank you for those. The A's, D's, and R's.
Yeah.
And thank you again so much for speaking with me.
Absolutely. It has been a pleasure. Thank you,
Well,
Rachel.
pleasure has definitely been mine. Thank you so much.